Okay. So, after this very beautiful, sensitive sound music we enjoyed, now back to something quite dry and in fact, the second chapter, we begin with trying to convince Mahayana is the teaching of the Buddha, basically. Let us sort of arrange ourselves for that. You know, Mahayana, forget Vajrayana, that's so-called the Tantrayana, that some of you are exposed. Mahayana was a controversy in the past. 2000, we are talking about 2000 years ago. It was a controversy. Even rewinding a little bit more, what Buddha taught was revolutionary. Not something that is common or we are talking about 2,500 years ago. Actually, the truth is fundamentally important for many of the, if you like, philosophical system around that time. The truth. Especially for Buddhism, truth is so important. It's fundamental. And when we talk about the truth, I know many of you know this, but I need to stress this again and again. We are not talking about a divine, supernatural, exotic truth at all. We are talking about actually very, very simple, fundamental truth. So simple that we just can't, our habitual mind can't accept. There is a saying in some of the Buddhist teaching, like eyelashes, it's too close to you that you don't see. Likewise, some of this, the fundamental teaching of the fundamental truth is too simple. Even the relative truth, not the fundamental truth, many times we find it difficult to accept. Probably intellectually we can accept, but it's far more difficult to accept emotionally, practically. One very good example is like the death. The moment you are born, if you are subject of birth, which you and I are. We have been, whether you like it or not, you have gone through birth. You're already here. You have no choice. So, as someone who has, who is subject of birth, you are guaranteed. You have no escape from the death. But to tell a family who has a newborn baby, and to tell this family, hey, okay, the baby is born, now it's time to write the will of this baby, is difficult. Because you are expecting this baby is going to last for some time, isn't it? In fact, forever, with all the peach. What is it? The longevity peach and the old man with a long beard, plus all these Vajrayana longevity mantras and initiations and etc., etc. And then also, it's in our culture. I forgot. I just learned this word and I forgot. How do you pray to the king? Something like 10,000 years, may you live long, right? Yes. One soul. Yes, one soul. No emperors have lived 10,000 years. And they themselves have not really accepted that. They themselves have not really come to, harmony with this truth. Like, one of the Chinese very, very powerful powerful emperor, who basically made effigy of him, effigy of the palace, the guards, all the retinue. What's his name? The Emperor Xi? Emperor Qi? Yes, Qing. That's almost as stupid as, okay, I'm dying tomorrow, I'm going to pack some sandwich to take along with me, you understand? In case there is no Starbucks. But we don't come in terms with these truths, you understand? Now we are talking about a raw truth. How many of you have grandfathers, that great-great-grandfather that's about 500 years old? No one. This is the truth. But even this raw, tangible, visible, touchable, simple truth, we cannot come in, we know this. I'm sure we all know. If intellectually analyzed, we all know, yes, we are going to die. But really coming in terms with this truth, emotionally and practically, it's difficult. And why is it difficult? Not because it's like a rocket science, but because there's something called habit. For instance, like myself, I teach impermanence. That's my job. But I make plans of year 2018 until November year 2018. I've already planned. I've told people, come November 2018, I will be at your doorstep. It's in my diary. Assuming that I'll be there. Blindly believing that that's going to happen. You understand? So the truth that, not being able to accept the truth. When we go to shopping, when we buy things, like a shirt, we just assume that we are going to wear it one of these days. So that's one of the truths that Buddha taught. And that there's other truths such, if we can't accept this level of truth, then even more simple than this truth. Very difficult. Actually, the Shunyata is even more simple than this truth of death and dying. It's too simple. We just cannot get it. We may, this probably even intellectually difficult to get. To accept that how we see things is not how things really are. It's just a perception. That's one of the truth, one of the aspects of the truth, and very difficult to accept. But anyway, that is the fundamental teaching of the Buddha. And that need to be established. That cannot be forgotten. That cannot be, we cannot lose that. All the methods such as meditation, prayers, such as taking a vow, all this is purely to understand this truth, and not just understand, maintain, enhance, mature the understanding of this truth. That's the only reason why they are there. And yesterday we were talking about two kinds of teachings. Today I will use more classic term. Expedient teaching, that the expedient teaching and the direct teaching. Yesterday I used Cinderella teaching and non-Cinderella teaching. Expedient teachings, basically any kind of teachings that really, covers the, the truth, the absolute truth, is direct teaching. And if you recall, such as the Vajracchedika Sutra, Diamond Sutra, I think it's called Diamond Sutra, translated as a Diamond Sutra, Vajracchedika Sutra, where Buddha really expound the truth in the most raw format, so to speak. Prajnaparamita Sutra, again, the explanation of the truth in the complete, naked, raw, direct, nothing, no Cinderella at all. Maybe in the beginning and the end. How? Once upon a time, when Buddha was on Vulture's Peak, and he was in samadhi of all illuminating. And then Shariputra sort of was puzzled, and he asked Avalokiteshvara, so, all that questions and so on and so forth. Now that is just more like a Cinderella. And then towards the end, Shakyamuni Buddha rose from the all-illuminating samadhi and told Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara, good. Your discussion was excellent. That's it. So on and so forth. That, you can say, is more like a Cinderella. And then everybody applaud the gods, the human beings, stuff like this. That's necessary because, you need to, as I say, Cinderella teachings, it's not a derogatory comment. Cinderella teachings are absolutely important. So important, equally. In fact, for people like you and me, Cinderella works better. Non-Cinderella is unchewable. It's like giving, a small baby a big American hamburger to chew. It's impossible. You have to make the teachings soluble, like digestible. In appropriate size to fit in this small mouth that we have. And it should, it should not make us, it should do a lot of things. It should, shake our comfort zone, yes, of course. But it should also make you elevate yourself into another different kind of comfort zone. That's how the teachings are. I quote this again and again, and I think this is kind of important. Buddha, it's believed that Shakyamuni Buddha, under the Bodhi tree, after achieving enlightenment, after reaching the Nirvana, the first thing he said was, I have found a truth that is profound, peaceful, extremeless, luminous, uncompounded. Anyway, 5 different elements, 5 different characters. He said that I found a truth, but no matter to whom I speak, nobody is going to hear this. Nobody is going to hear this. So therefore, I am going to dwell in the forest without speaking. Never said, this, in many ways, one can understand that that's already a teaching. Even, the fact that he said, nobody's going to hear this is already a teaching. Because what he's saying is the truth. As I said yesterday, our language is so vague. Our language is inadequate, not good enough. So to express the complete truth is difficult. And then the next thing, what happened was, at the request of Brahma and Indra, who asked, Buddha, in order to liberate beings from the suffering, please, you have to have a way to make this truth available to the sentient beings. And that's how the 84,000 teachings begun for different people, for different capacity, different, faculties. Anyway, the truth is the fundamental. I was explaining about today's chapter, especially the beginning of the today's chapter, because I was saying that Mahayana is in a way controversial. It was disputed. In fact, it is still disputed. Imagine, it's a bit like this. In this room full of people, I say, this is water. You understand? To the general audience, okay? I said, this is water. Okay, afterwards, during the break, maybe to a certain group of people, 50 people, I said, actually there's a little bit of vodka in it. You understand? So these 50 people heard. Much later, these 50 people tells the rest of the people, actually, he gave us vodka. The rest of the people will dispute. No. He said himself this was water. How can it be vodka? There is no vodka. It's a bit like this. When Buddha taught, beginning from Saranath, to the general audience, such as the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, and make note the word general audience. General audience, what does that mean? Perfect audience that can only hear Cinderella stories. You know what I mean? Because this 50 group, they are much more, they can hear some other stories. The general audience, it's very difficult to talk to general audience because they hear differently. Even here, even as I speak, you must be hearing it differently. And we can all assume that we are hearing the same thing. But that's not really true. You keep on hearing it differently. You keep on interpreting it differently. This is not new. This is right from the beginning. Even the sutras, it always begins with, "Thus have I heard." Never there is a sutra that begins, "Thus Buddha spoke this way." There's no that kind of, assertion that Ananda never asserted that this is what Buddha said. Ananda always says, "This is what I heard." Someone else could have heard something different. And there are other things too. Thus have I heard at one time. This is very, very important. At one time. Because Buddha taught in many different places. He could have said something else at another time. Another thing that it says, "Dike dagi teba dilchigna chomdende yul jagipungujula jukte." Thus have I heard at one time, at a specific place like Nagroda Grove, or Sal Grove, or Vulture's Peak, or at Saranath, or Vaishali. Because at different times, he may have, and he has said that, and this is where I'm going to summarize this. This is very important to begin the chapter today. On top of that, this is the most tough one. The audience. Have you ever tried reading some of the sutras, the classic sutras? Sometimes, if the sutra is this big, this much, the beginning of this much, is usually the list of people who was attending Bodhisattva this, Bodhisattva that, blah 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 this, list of people. Have you noticed that? And then another thing, if you read it carefully, here at least, if we make a list of these people, we are quite, most of you are human beings, I'm assuming. And but, within the human beings, there are Malaysians, there are Singaporeans, then I believe there's Australians, there are English, Taiwanese, and mainland Chinese. Now, they all think different, don't they? There's you can almost tell who is mainland Chinese and who is Singaporean. You can almost tell. And who is Hong Kongnese, who is Taiwanese, for instance. You can almost, probably not in this room. It used to be my hobby. Every time I go to Varanasi, it's my hobby, you Ganges River, and then you see all these tourists coming. And then those are Taiwanese group. Those are Singaporean group. And I'm quite good at this. For instance, again, by the way, I'm telling you this because I want to tell you something else. Very important thing. It's called generalization. I am generalizing, of course. Of course I'm generalizing. So when I look at a group of people who are all wearing same color baseball, same jacket, and everybody following in line, most likely they are Taiwanese. You understand? They are most likely Taiwanese. You understand? You can just of course this is a generalization. Now, the generalization is one of the it's a weakness. It's really not something good to do. But what else can we do? The generalization is the only communication that we have. I'm sure you are generalizing a lot of things about me today, right now, this very moment. And I am generalizing a lot of things about you. The group of people, race, color, shape, all this. So here, as I said, fairly, human beings, most of them. But in the sutras, have you noticed? Many listeners, audience, they are Nagas. Nagas are not, they are half animal. Then there's Gandharvas, they are ghosts. Then there are also Tushita heaven people, heavenly beings. Especially if you are reading the Mahayana Sutras. Then there are also Rakshasas. Rakshasas means, they're just, Rakshasas are those who are itching to harm someone else. They basically, they give problem. Nöjin, because in the Tibetan word it's called nöjin. Nö means harm, and jin means, who loves to make troubles, basically. So there are audience like that. Now, imagine how they are going to hear, how they are going to conceive the teachings. Okay? But historically, there has been issue, there has been dispute by the Sharvakayana people saying that, Mahayana teaching is not really the Buddha's teaching. We, the general people, we never heard. Buddha never spoke this in places like Saranath. Buddha never spoke. And contents-wise, it's not a small matter, by the way. For instance, in the Sharvakayana teachings, Buddha taught selflessness of a person. Buddha really talks about, like how, all problems, all our suffering begins with the clinging to the self, cherishing the self. But, self, what is self? Self is just a label given to 5 aggregates. So, even when Buddha taught Shunyata, emptiness, it's mainly concentrated on selflessness of the person and therefore 5 aggregates. So, but 5 aggregates, for instance, like zooming, form is like a bubble. Feeling is like a, the wrinkle of the, like a wave, like a ripple of the water. Basically, the Shunyata is much more concentrated on, because the aim is to get the hell out of samsara. Right? Aim is, the Sharvakayana see the samsara as a dungeon, the sort of pitfall, abyss. It's like a fire pit. It's really, you want to get out of this place as soon as possible. And also, you don't really think about the mass. You take care of yourself, mainly. You only, only you are your own master. Nobody is your master. And only you can wipe away your suffering. Cause of the suffering. Only you can, only you can apply the remedy and get rid of the cause of the suffering. No one, not even the Buddha, can do this for you. So on and so forth. This is what we hear from the Shakyamuni. Now, contents-wise, when we reach to the Mahayana, then we have a new information. Yes, of course, self does not exist, truly. It's an imputed label. Therefore, the five aggregates also is like an illusion, like a mirage, like a dream, like a ripple of the water. But what are the extra information? Very big. There is no Nirvana. What do you mean by Nirvana? There is no Samsara. There is no Nirvana. Now that, there's many more, but that bit, when you tell the general audience, there is no Nirvana, there is no Samsara, then the general audience gets shocked. What? No, this is only water. There is no vodka. Remember? Then the general audience says, no. Buddha never said there is no Nirvana. Buddha never said there is no Samsara. Look, this is Samsara. I am suffering. I have a cause of the suffering, such as anger, jealousy, pride. This is the cause of the suffering. And the Nirvana, and this cause of the suffering can be challenged and destroyed through samadhi, through vipassana, through shamatha, through applying the discipline, so on. Buddha taught us the path. Buddha never, and then after that, you will achieve liberation. Buddha said, Four Noble Truths, suffering, cause of the suffering, the end of the suffering, and the cause of the end of the suffering. So what do you mean by there is no Nirvana? There is no Buddha. Actually, in the Vajracchedika Sutra, remember? In the Vajracchedika, those who have read Vajracchedika Sutra, Diamond Sutra, where Buddha said, there is no Buddha, basically. Those who see Buddha as a form, they have a wrong view. Towards the end of the Vajracchedika Sutra. And it's because of this kind of teaching, also the Zen teaching, which is flourished in China and Japan. They also emulate what Buddha said. So if you see the Buddha in the street, kill him. Yeah, there are expressions like that in the Zen. Very correct, very profound, very vast teaching, which is based on the Mahayana concept. Now, you don't want to say, if you meet Buddha in the street, kill him, to general audience. You don't want to say that. To the general audience, if you meet the Buddha in the street, venerate, bow down, take refuge, make an offering. You are lucky. Wow, can I meet him too? So on and so forth. That's what you are supposed to behave. So, can you understand now why there is that controversy sort of? And I just want to throw in this a little bit, since, I'm kind of like a Vajrayana salesperson. Imagine that Vajrayana, now it's even more difficult. It's a bit like general audience. This is water. 50 people, I put some vodka in it. And then maybe 2 other people secretly, I said, I don't know. I say, I put some aphrodisiac. You understand? Then you are in a trouble. Then even these 50 people are not going to say, you tantric people, you've gone crazy. Buddha never said this. I was there. Yes, Buddha said there is a vodka, but that's as far as it goes. What do you mean aphrodisiac? That's so, like immoral. That's like how can Buddhists even think like that? How can Buddhists even speak words like aphrodisiac? How come this is even spoken here in this teaching? You understand? Much more trouble. So there is that dispute, has always been. And this is what you need to hear before you hear the second chapter. And basically, it's a Maitreya's answer to these questions, such as as I just said, there's a dispute from the general audience that the Mahayana teaching was Heirloom maten, meaning it was never spoken by the Buddha. And you guys made it up. This is actually a very, very, very important, very, very powerful, very dangerous accusations from the general audience. Mahayana is distortion. Mahayana teachings is actually wrong view in disguise. As I spoke to you earlier, general audience can't handle it. There is no Nirvana, there is no Samsara, there is no Buddha. If you read the Heart Sutra, it's in there. And in the Prajnaparamita Sutra, Buddha said this again and again. This is what he said. Nirvana is like a dream, like an illusion, like a mirage. If there's something that is even more precious and more special than Nirvana, even that is like a mirage, like an illusion, so on and so forth. And also, Buddha himself have advised to his disciples that, I think the question was raised during the Buddha's time, that how in the future the teachings can be valued and assessed whether actually the teaching is authentic or not. One of the classic ways is if the teaching enters to the sutra without any contradiction, if the teachings can be found in the Vinaya, if the teaching does not contradict with the Abhidharma, this is one way to sort of assess and evaluate the teaching. And the general audience will argue that Mahayana is not entering the sutra properly. And Mahayana is not found in the Vinaya. And Mahayana really, really contradicts with the Abhidharma. Because, maybe I should just first go through the stanzas. For instance, in the Vinaya, if a monk or a nun say that there is no Buddha, there is no Dharma, there is no Sangha, then that is a breach of bhikshu or bhikshuni's sort of Vinaya vow. Now, Mahayana clearly states that Buddha, Dharma, Sangha are all not truly existent. You understand? There is no samsara, there is no nirvana. So this really contradicts with the Vinaya. And this is a big one. For the general audience, Buddha made a very clear distinctions between problem and the solution. In other words, like problems such as discursive mind or emotional mind or defiled mind, and the solution such as shamatha, vipassana, mindfulness. But whereas in the Mahayana, fundamentally, Mahayana would say that there is no truly existing defiled mind. There is no truly existing emotional mind. Yeah, talking about the Shunyata, of course. So this is something that cannot be accepted by the general audience. So to answer this, which is okay, there's a several answers here. Some of them may be a little bit, a little bit difficult to understand, since you probably are not so familiar with the sort of the cultural context. In the Sharvakayana tradition, they also talk about three kinds of nirvana state. There's an arhat, state of arhat. Then there's a state of pratyeka Buddha, and then there's also the sort of the Buddha's state. Arhat, pratyeka Buddha, and the Bodhisattva's Buddha. And in order to achieve the Buddhahood, the state of the Buddha, one can only do it by understanding the complete Shunyata. In other words, just understanding the selflessness of the person and the selflessness of the aggregate is not sufficient enough. So, if the general audience, if the Sharvaka school believes that there are three types of liberation, then this is what Maitreya is saying. By consequences, the Sharvaka people have to accept that there is a greater or more complete path in order to bring you to the more complete Buddhahood. even in the Sharvakayana, the state of the Arhat. Now this is very there's so much technical language and so much jargon here, which I cannot escape. For those who are familiar with the Buddhist studies, this might help. So I should express this a little bit. But for those who are not, just bear with me a little bit. For the Sharvakayana, they also say that there is much more than the Arhat state. There's actually the Pari-Nirvana of the Buddha. Arhats are almost considered as the disciple, the sort of the secondary to the Buddha. So the path to realize the complete state of the Buddha has to be greater than the path that takes you to the Arhat only. So by consequences, Maitreya is saying that even though you guys may be not paying attention, there has to be a path. So that's one. I don't know whether you can actually understand that within, as I said, the cultural context is a little bit difficult here. One thing I need to tell you is this. It is going to be difficult, no matter what, to convince the general audience that the Mahayana teaching is the Buddha. How should I put it? But if there is sufficient time and step by step build up to the, logic the logic of the teaching, then Mahayana has a complete confidence to prove that the Mahayana teachings is also the Buddha's teaching. I will give you the reason. Okay. For instance, several things. Even the Sharvakayana people have to accept that Buddha is omnipotent and omniscient. They also have to accept that Buddha taught to different beings with a different method. That they have to accept. If they don't accept that, they are demeaning or downgrading the quality of the Buddha. As I spoke earlier, this is why I was emphasizing, in the teachings when Buddha taught, there were even Nagas, Asuras, Gandharvas, altogether different species listening to his teachings. So, different logic, different ayatanas or different dhatus, different ayatanas or different, different faculties. There are different faculties. And even for the Sharvakayana, they will have to accept that Buddha is omnipotent and powerful enough and omniscient enough to speak to different capacities. So based with this logic, one can establish that the Mahayana teachings, such as the grand Shunyata, is taught to those who has that kind of capacity. Of course, you don't necessarily have to convince that it is a greater teaching. Greater or lesser is very, very relative. But based on this logic, basically it's like this. If there is if there is a, how should I put it? If there is an object that causes the fixation, if the fixation is the cause of the samsara. Fixation. Basically, thinking something is real and something is valid, something is valuable, and or something is good, bad, all kinds of distinctions. As long as there is dualistic distinctions, which then becomes the cause of the fixation, that fixation is an opposition to the concept of liberation. So the Mahayana's Shunyata that is taught in texts such as Vajrayana Sutra is definitely an opposition to all kinds of fixation. So the interest, maybe I should, this is one quotation I'd like to bring again and again. It's such a beautiful quotation, beautiful verses by Shantadeva. Shantadeva said, which means, he said, for the time being, our practitioners can have one ignorance. For the time being, just for the, Yes, for the time being, as a tool, practitioners can have one ignorance. And what is that? Thinking that there is an enlightenment. That can be used as a tool to motivate oneself that there is an enlightenment. I think I will give you some chance to ask questions regarding this, because probably we are not communicating here properly. This is quite dense. Should we do some question and answer now? If the questions are specifically based on this, would be good. We can always talk about other things later, if we have time. But if the questions are around this, would be helpful.
Hello, Rinpoche. I'd like to ask a very simple question. I understand what you are teaching us today. However, how do we try as much as possible to integrate this level of understanding into our current practice already?
Okay.
Is that possible?
Oh, that there is so many methods. Can you hold on to that question? Yeah, can you hold on? That's an important question. If I forget, can you remind? Yes, that's an important question, because this is related to, because actually this is an important question, because you may think, okay, this is all like reading Nietzsche, for instance. Wow, the Shunyata, emptiness, nothing exists, everything is your projection, everything is your mind made. So what? I still have to eat, I still have to drink, I still think that I'm going to see you in year 2021. All of that, all this, how do I deal with this? How is this going to help? There are so many practical, methods, such as, I'll just give you briefly one, such as, the Shamatha Vipassana. So, in the Shamatha Vipassana, what do? You do two things. With the Shamatha, what you do is you learn this technique so that you realize you can't do it. That's what Shamatha is, actually. You understand? Basically, Shamatha is to concentrate, not to be distracted. That's what shamatha is. So, your teacher tells you, okay, concentrate on this glass of water for 2 minutes. And then the moment you concentrate, you hear this noise, think of the next thing. You understand? So that's one thing you will realize, you cannot concentrate. Now, if your teacher is good, when you report, oh, I can't concentrate at all, then teacher will give you a medal, because that means you have done a good shamatha meditation. Because you are, for the first time, beginning to understand, you are a distracted person. That then you develop, you do it again and again and again. And then you reach to some sort of a calmness. The moment you are distracted, you also know you are distracted. Right now, after 20 minutes, we know. Sometimes after 21 years later, we know. You understand? But after a while, the skill is so good, the moment you are distracted, moment you know you are distracted. You are still frustrated. You say, only I can actually never ever get distracted in the first place. But that's still good, you can't push too hard. This is good. Now in the vipassana, what you do is, with the calmness of the shamatha, vipassana, then basically vipassana in Sanskrit actually means seeing something extra. Seeing something extra. Meaning, right now, when you are looking at me or I'm looking at you, when you are interacting with the world, you only see how it appears. And how it appears is what you think, how really things are. But that is not true. Appearances are deceiving. Remember, even in the common, but we say this, appearance can be deceiving. Yes, it's actually not only can be deceiving, it's always deceiving. Appearance is not what it is. This is what is actualized by the vipassana. And for that, you need to do hearing, such as what we are doing now, contemplation, and the meditation technique, thousands, millions, to bring in that understanding of insight. What is really the truth? You understand? So there's so many techniques. And in order to assist this, Buddhism never will reject you from going to temple, chanting mantra, incense, flowers, all that seemingly ritualistic, cultural aspect of, exercise, discipline, never rejected. Should not. You remember, Cinderella is very important. But you don't necessarily have to do one thing that someone else is doing. You will have your own sort of method. So basically, what I want to say is, please remind me towards the end, if you are still bothering with this question. But this is it for now. There are a lot of practical things such as shamatha and vipassana. But any other questions regarding the dispute from the general audience to the Mahayana audience? I mean the Mahayana followers. The Mahayana teaching is not a Buddha's teaching. Okay? That's a big accusation. Okay?
Assume we accept that the Mahayana is taught by the Buddha.
Okay.
How can we be sure that the Buddha is telling the truth, that when you wake up from the dream, the pain is no longer there? That means what we are suffering is just in a dream. So how can we have the logic that when we wake up, we won't dream again, but when we are in the awakenment like the Buddha, Buddhas do not feel pain.
Again, can you repeat? How can we? Okay, assuming that the Mahayana teaching is the teaching of the Buddha, what is the relation with that? And
that means we accept it's taught by the Buddha, but in the Mahayana solution, there is a Buddhist solution. That means when you are awakened or when we wake up from our dreams, the pain which we experience in our dream is not real. So when we wake up, there shouldn't be any pain. But how do we, in a way, besides faith, I mean, is there a way to argue through logically that what the Buddha is saying is the truth?
Okay, there is. That's quite fairly easy. This one, because whatever is giving you pain, the cause of the pain has to have its own cause and condition. Can you understand that logic? It can't just pop up out of nowhere. And the Buddhists don't believe in a God, so therefore it cannot be like punishment of the God because you forgot to, please him or something. You understand? So nothing comes randomly without cause and condition. Can you understand that logic? Basically, it's very simple. If you want to have a breakfast, if you want to have a fried egg, you can just look at the egg and it will cook itself. You have to move. You have to, switch on the fire, all of that. You understand? So, we use this is what the Buddhists do. We use this logic, the opposite. Okay, here our aim is to be free from suffering. So in that case, what do? Two things. Either you attack the cause of the suffering and eliminate it, or you enhance and encourage the cause of the happiness. You understand? Yeah, replacement. So these are the two things that you can do. It's called the path of accumulation and the path of, purification. So, sa, dibajang. Dibajang means, cleaning, So, the Buddhist, it's called causal logic. Playing with the cause, condition, and effect is very, very handy. But habitually, you will say, because habit is very strong. Habit is so strong. Like drinking habit, for instance. Once it becomes so strong, then no matter what you do, promises in front of the shrines, promises in front of the friends, New Year's resolution. The moment you see, Jack Daniels or, this ritual of the drinking, you will just fall for it. You understand? But that does not prove that the addiction has become permanent. Actually, the Buddhists would say the very drinking habit you actually accumulated, step by step. You didn't come out from your mother with a bottle of whiskey, you understand, and half drunk. You developed this habit slowly, you understand, and you got comfortable with it, and then now you become inseparable with it. So now you think, alcohol is must, but it's not really must. It's a power of how much can you really work with your habit. But that's, of course, if you are telling me that's difficult, yes, it is difficult in one way. On the other hand, not so difficult because you just need discipline. This is where the Buddhist concept of Shila the discipline comes. If you look into the Buddhist discipline, it's very, very, very simple, very almost like childlike. But they are all designed to bring you awareness. For instance, one of the suggested discipline is when you meditate, sit straight. There is actually no reason why you cannot meditate on a hammock. You understand? What you really need is a sober mind, sort of mindfulness. Mindfulness can be done, in a hammock. You understand? But chances are, right now, especially in the beginning, hammock might lead to other things, such as sleeping, distractions. So chances of you being more mindful happens, that there are more chances by actually sitting straight for 2-3 minutes. So the Buddhist design of the Buddhist disciplines are always like this. Always. It's really, sitting straight is not the end. It's means. The means and the end. It is sitting straight. It's a method. It's a good method. It is something that you should apply, you should encourage, but that's not the end. A good Buddhist should not be judged by how a person could sit straight. Otherwise, those who have a spine problems, then you can't have they will automatically become bad Buddhist because they have a bad spine or a sitting, posture, hunchback, forget it. They have no enlightenment then. That doesn't, so discipline. Anyway, any more questions regarding this?
Usually there are 2 questions that came in on behalf.
Okay.
Question 1, what do you mean by emptiness is independent? Emptiness is also a dependent arising according to the middle way consequence school, so I'm confused. How can something be independent yet a dependent arising?
Okay.
Question 2, in order to dwell into this text, which school of emptiness, autonomous middle way school or consequence middle way school, should we adopt in order to understand?
Okay. First of all, this is quite a philosophical question. So those who are not philosophically inclined, please think of your shopping list. Okay. What did I say? The truth is the most important. That's what I said. Second, I said language. Human language is not good enough to accentuate and, pronounce and explain this truth. That's what I said. And I've also said, Buddha himself said, nobody's going to hear this. Nobody has the ear, sort of the listening power, hearing power. I'm going to shut up. Next, the 2 disciples, Brahma and Indra, please, I know it's very difficult to understand, but you must know somehow a way to talk about this truth. So out of compassion, please. Then that's the beginning of the Cinderella's. So, in order to talk about the truth, in Buddhism, we talk about 2 truths, relative truth and ultimate truth. the emptiness that this person is talking about falls into the department of ultimate truth, let's say. But bear in mind, even the two truths, we can only talk during the relative truth. There is no such thing as true truth. It's a made-up one. Remember Cinderella? Always go back to Cinderella. We have to speak like this. So, yes, strictly speaking, it is dependent, ultimate truth is dependent on the relative truth, and the dependent truth is relative truth is dependent on the ultimate truth, and so on and so forth. But absolute, if they, again here we are trying to speak something that cannot be spoken. So in order to define that, I was saying yesterday, truth. What is truth? Truth is something that should not be changeable, manipulatable. It should not be something that is contrived. If the truth can be changeable, then you are in trouble. This morning it's orange. This afternoon it becomes blue. Which one do you trust? Is it the blue that I should be looking for or the orange? You understand? But things like all those who are being born are going to die. That is not going to change. And by the way, it is not made up by Buddha. Even before Buddha Shakyamuni came, people died. You understand? People died. And even long after, people who are being born, they will die. Where there is a birth, there is a death. This is why also in Buddhism, Buddhists actually, generally we human beings worry more about the death, right? We worry about the death. But Buddhists actually worry equally about the birth also. If you read Nagarjuna's letter to his friend, this is one big, where there's a shloka, please be careful about the birth, because it makes sense. If you happen to be born, which you have no choice. You and I have no choice now. You and I are subject of birth. So therefore we are subject of death. That's not going to change. So independent. That's what I mean by independent. I've forgotten the later questions, the last one.
In order to dwell into this text, which school of
Oh, yes. It's slightly different, this one. This is, by the way, yes, of course, Madhyamika as in the truth. Yes, you can say this is a Madhyamika. This definitely is not middle way. It is definitely middle way. So it is a Madhyamika. It is the teachings, this is a commentary to Buddha's teachings such as Prajna Paramita. Absolutely. But I think the person's talking about Madhyamikan school, which came after the Nagarjunas and Aryadeva and Buddha Palita, Chandrakirti, so on and so forth. Now, if you are talking about that, then Maitreya is at altogether a different basket here. Because, remember in India, long after Buddha passed away, India had this great university called Nalanda University. And there, by and large, especially the Tibetans, what they teach you today, most of the Tibetans, what they teach, and I would say probably also Chinese, because people like, I don't know so much about the Chinese Mahayana Buddhism, but someone like Xuanzang, he very much was alumni of Nalanda University. So, Nalanda University is a very, very influential in commentating the Buddhist philosophy. So if you are talking about Nalanda University, there are what we Tibetans, we say there are two charioteers, or the two main commentators of the Buddha's teaching. One is Nagarjuna, and the other is either Asanga or Maitreya. So this belongs to the Maitreya commentator. So we don't talk about whether this thing is Prasangika Madhyamikan, consequentialist, or Svatantrikan Madhyamikan. We have no, it is not related. I'm sorry with all these, terms and just, but you have to sort of get, it comes, unfortunately, it comes with such text. But main thing is in this chapter, we are trying to sort of again talk about a Mahayana. Yesterday we talked about a Mahayana, and we talked about sort of the definition of Maha. Today we are again talking about the Mahayana in the way of trying to explain how Mahayana has all the components that can destroy the fixation, the root of the defilement. Mahayana has all the ingredients to take you to the liberation. This is what we need to hear. And what you are hearing is important in a way, because often we hear very conflicting messages. This is classic Buddhism. Buddhism is always a challenging, because Buddhism fundamentally really is concerned with the truth. Really, that is the fundamental. And Buddhism is really not byproduct of some sort of a political situation. It's important to know, please make note of that, because many religions are. Sometimes I watch these talk shows, the experts talk about religion. All religions are fundamentally same. Absolutely not. I will disagree with this. Yes, if I'm invited in a big religious conference, I might have to say kind of yes. Because you have to behave. But fundamentally not. Superficially, yes. Buddhists will, Christians will say don't steal. Christians will say love thy neighbor. Muslims will say, don't lie. Same thing. Buddhists will also say. Superficially, there's a lot of similarity. But fundamentally, it's very, very different. And this makes a big difference, because when Buddhists say, especially like a Mahayana, the Christians would say, temptation, right? The Christians also talk about temptation. Oh, this, the desirable object is not good, it's a satanic, it's very evil, it's bad, it's sinful to do it. to get engaged with this. Okay. Superficially, something like this you will hear from Buddhists also, but the thing is, in Buddhism, especially in the Mahayana Buddhism, desirable objects we need to renounce fundamentally because desirable objects are illusion, not because they are truly existing desirable objects. You understand? This is a difference between things like Christians and Buddhists. Many other religions are trying to get rid of something that is really bad. The Buddhists are saying, yeah, but this is not really bad. This is a dream. And knowing that this is not real, this is an illusion. That's how you take care of the problem. Going back to my analogy of dream. If you are, dreaming a giant spider raping you, for instance. You understand? Yes, you can get rid of this, spider, you can chase away, but suddenly, this is a dream. Then what? Then you can maybe play with it, play with this non-existing but seemingly existing spider. This is how you are taught. You understand? So, yes, sometimes I hear, I listen to these talk shows and experts talking, all religions have violent aspect. Absolutely not true. Because what do we mean by violence? When we talk about violence, we are always talking about gain and loss, isn't it? There's something to gain and you fight for it. You then, I'm not saying that I'm not saying that all Buddhists are good. Absolutely not. I can always volunteer myself. I'm not a good Buddhist. I can be violent. I can be really deceiving and all of that. But I'm talking about Buddhism, the path. Not all religions are, fundamentally violent, such as Buddhism, such as Jainism. Because violence is when you have something to gain politically, when it is something to do with, the big boss, the Shakyamuni Buddha, left everything. He had everything what he wants. He had peacocks, elephants. He had everything. He left. Violence for what? No territory. He was not looking for territory. He didn't have any dispute with cousins. He wasn't leading a sort of a group of tribe called, he wasn't, it's not in his agenda. So it can't be violent. I mean, you can always be very metaphorical and say that emptiness is the biggest violence because it destroys all the, I think, this is the problem. Sometimes these so-called religious experts, they hear words like arhat. Arhat means foe, destroyer, enemy, destroyer, isn't it? So they say, see, the Buddhists are also violent. Because Buddhists talk about enemy, destroyer. But in the history of Buddhism, the main enemy of Buddhism is ignorance, which you carry within yourself. That is something that you have to struggle, isn't it? So, I think fundamental view, understanding that through study of this kind of classic texts, I think it's really, really important. I mean, if you want to study Christianity, you read Bible. You try to see what is in there. If you want to study Islam, you study Quran or Hadith. If you want, not just, some, mullahs or priests talking whatever their commentary, you can, general people can do that. But some of us who are holding the stakes, sort of stakeholders, or if you really want to know the fundamental stuff, it's good to visit some of these classic texts. Okay, maybe we should have a lunch break.